Okay, all of you, in the last class, we have started with the third unit, that is case planning, management, executing, and reporting. So, we have seen that, like uh, a normal project, we need to see testing as a project itself, and we need to plan for it. So, before planning, we need to see uh, some we need to ask some of the questions, that what needs to be tested. That is, we need to decide scope of testing, what we want to test. Then second question we need to answer is how the testing is going to be performed, what will be the process of testing, how will you be breaking down the task into smaller tasks, and how you will be assigning the particular task to the teams. Next is what resources are needed. What type of resources you will require for testing. Next is what will be the timeline for the testing. How much time you are having for the testing. And last thing is to what will be the risk faced while testing, and what will be the mitigation policies to minimize the risk. And we need to also classify the types of risk, whether which type of risk you will consider as a mild one, which as a major one, and which as a extreme one. Yeah, so you need to classify that also. Related to scope, we need to, for testing scope management, we are having understanding what constitute a release of a product. We need to first see uh, what product we want to develop, and depending upon that, what you want to test, you need to decide. We need to break down release into features. Means at a time we will not deliver whole of the project, but stepwise we will to deliver the project in different releases. Next thing, you need to prioritize the features to be tested. What features uh, you want to test first, and what features you will be testing later on. It depends upon the dependency of a particular features on which the other features are dependent on. Right? So you need to test those features which are having higher dependency. Right? Then deciding which features will be tested and which will not be tested, that also you need to decide. Then gathering details to prepare for estimation of resources for testing. Then deciding features to be tested or not. Uh, the features that are new, what you want to test, and that also you need to decide. First, the features that are new and critical for the release need to be tested. Similarly, features whose failure can be catastrophic, which will lead to another failure, and that need to be tested. Then features that are expected to be complex need to be tested first. Then features which are extension of earlier features, that had to be. These are the general criteria on which you can decide the priority of the test cases to be tested. Which test cases you want to test first, which later on, which test cases are dependent on others, that you need to decide depending upon these are some of the features on which you will decide. Then what type of approaches or strategies you want to test, you want to implement for testing. You have to again ask some of the questions for it. What type of testing would you use for testing the functionality? What are the configurations or scenario for testing the features? Then what integration testing would you do to ensure this feature work together? What localization validations would be needed, and what not functional testing would you need to do. So, these are the questions which will uh, give us the strategy of or the approaches for the testing. Right. Another factors which affect the testing is the size and effort needed for the particular testing. What uh, in the previous class we have seen how you can calculate the size. Size is generally kilo lines of code, maybe measured in kilo lines of code. Then it can be measured in terms of functional units which are there, or uh, for simplicity you can measure uh, as the number of pages you are developing or the database you are developing, how many tables or relationships you are developing. That can be a size factor. Efforts are generally calculated in terms of person month, right? How many person you will require for doing a particular task. Right? So that comes under person month. Then we have already seen you need to set up criteria for testing. So as we have already seen in unit 1, eh, testing is continuous process. So when to start and when to stop a particular testing is a big problem. So in order to overcome those problems, we just decide the entry and exit criteria for test. What will be the entry criteria and what will be the exit criteria for the testing, right? For example, suppose there are more number of defects, uh, right? So you need to suspend the test, right? If all the test, okay, if the 90% of critical test cases has been tested, so you can exit from the testing. That can be one of the criteria, right? uh, so like this you need to decide upon the criteria for uh, the testing, for entering into the testing and for exiting from the testing. Because if you over over testing, if any product, it is as good as failing the particular product, right? So that's why you need to decide on entry and exit criteria. Some of the criteria for suspension of testing are also given, like you have encountered more than a certain number of defects, then hitting some showstopper, some critical bug is there, then developer realize a new version, okay, that new version is being releasing, so you will stop it. Whenever those conditions are addressed, you can resume the testing. Then topic is you need to identify responsibilities, staffing and training needed, right? So identifying responsibilities, staffing and training needed address this aspect. The testing project requires different people to play different roles, right? Like test engineer, test lead and test manager. So different roles will be there. These different roles should complement each other, right? They should uh, work in collaboration with each other. Then only you can complete the testing in stipulated period of time. The different role definition should ensure there is a clear accountability for a given case, right? There should be a clear accountability. Clear accountability means who is responsible for particular testing should be clear. Clearly list the responsibility for various functions to various people. Proper work should be assigned to each and everyone. Scalability of workload should be there. Then complement each other, ensuring no one steps on other tools, and supplement each other so that no task is left unassigned. Then next is you need to identify the resources required, like you required machines with particular configuration, certain amount of RAM, graphics card, hard disks, and so on. Other overheads required by the test, like test automation tools, etc. Some supporting tools such as compilers, data generators, configuration management tools, and so on. What is this configuration management tool? These are all also can be termed as change management tool. Sometimes change management tools means what changes you make to the configuration or the software that can be managed by a particular tool. So supporting tools may be that. Then some special requirements for running, like special requirement for running machine in intensive testing such as load testing and performance testing. Then appropriate number of licensed software. In addition, we require environment requirements such as office space, support functions like HR, and so on. Then the most important is you need to identify the test deliverables. What you need to deliver to the customer in a particular stipulated period of time, that you need to identify. The test plan also identifies the deliverables that should come out of the test cycle or testing activity. The deliverables include the following, all reviewed and approved by the appropriate people. The test plan itself, you need to deliver the test plan. Then test case design specification. What will be the test case design specification? Just like software requirement specification, you are having test case design specification, which will tell us what you will be testing, right? Up to what extent you will test it. It includes all the things like entry plan, exit plan, what functionality you will be testing, what functionality you will not be testing, in which release what you will be testing, all those contents will be there. Then test cases includes an automation that is specified in the plan. Then test logs produced by running the test cases. Then test summary report. Then you are having repository, uh, defect repository. Defect repository uh, is a is a database wherein you store uh, the status of the defect. Right? You will store the status of the defect, status of your defect. Right? So that is called as defect repository. Every defect every defect will have uh, its own identification number, uh, what defect has been occurred, what type of defect is there, and whether the defect is active or inactive or rectified. That status is also there. So that whole data set includes the defect repository. That is nothing but the database of the defect, you can say, in other words. We have seen size, estimation, effort, schedule. Like size, you can measure in lines of code. In Kokomo model, we have seen we represent it by kilo lines of code. Then functional points are there. Then different measure of sizes, screens, reports, or transaction which we do, that can be measure of your size. Okay, when automation is required, the size of your work need to be will get increased, right? Because whenever you are automating any testing, what we automate a particular testing which gets repeated, right? For which we are having repeated uh, for a particular functionality we are repeatedly testing. For that we do a automation testing, but automation testing requires additional work, additional homework to be done, right? So that's why it says that the size of work done is increased when you go for automation. Then we need to see the number of platforms and interoperability environments we need to test. It may have, if it is a web application, you are having two platforms. One will be your web server and another one will be your database server. So, this also defines the size of your product. In order to have a better handle on the size estimate, the work to be done is broken down into smaller, more manageable parts called as work breakdown structure, WBS. For a testing project, WBS units are typically test cases for a given model. Generally, these are the test cases for a particular model. Generally, it will be the functionality, a common functionality which will be tested by a particular team. This decomposition breaks down the problem domain or the product into simpler parts, and it is likely to reduce the uncertainty and unknown factor. Size estimate is expressed in terms of any of the following. Um, for testing, we can write the number of test cases, the number of test scenarios may be there, the number of configurations to be tested. That can define the size for the test. Then estimating the effort. Estimating effort is important because often efforts has a more direct influence on the cost than size. What will be the efforts required? How many persons you will require? That has more impact on the cost than the size. Uh, it includes productivity data means productivity refers to the speed at which the various activities of the test can be carried. Um, you can say that sometimes it may happen that you are having 100 test cases and 10 persons are there which we can divide this total number of test cases into 10 persons, means 10% can test those 100 test cases, means each person will get 10 test cases. Suppose 1 hour is required to execute those 10 cases, 10 test cases. So we can say that if we are having 10 persons, it will be executed in 1 hour, right? But in practical, it is not so. Why? Because some of the test cases are independent and some of the test cases are interdependent on other test cases. So it may be that whole of the test cases are interdependent on each other. In that case, total you will require 10 hours of work to execute those 100 test cases. Right? If all the test cases are independent, you will require only 1 hour. So the efforts required are relative to uh, the size, but again, it may be that there is interdependency among the test cases. So that will affect your productivity. Right? And then some reuse opportunities may be there. Right? So it will reduce your efforts. If certain uh, tool you are using, which is already tested, then the effort for testing that particular tool will get reduced. Another factor which can affect your efforts is robustness of the process. Process, what you mean by process is uh, a well structured organization wherein how you will do the work is defined. That is called as process, right? So if how to do a particular thing is already defined, the thing will get done easily, smoothly, and in a faster way, right? So that's why if your process is robust, right, if your process is robust, the uh, time required or effort required will be less. In an organization with higher level of process maturity, there are likely to be well documented standard for writing test specification, test scripts, and so on. There will be proven process for performing functions such as reviewing and audits. Consistent way of training people and objective way of measuring the effectiveness of the compliance to the process. So these are the property of robust process. If we are having robust process, then efforts required will get reduced. All this reduce the need to reinvent the wheel and thus enable reduction in effort involved. Right? So efforts are measured, already I have told you, in percentage, person months, or person year. Sometimes in person hour. Then you need to break down activity. So activity breakdown and scheduling. How you can break down a particular activity and how you can schedule it. The activity breakdown and scheduling estimation entails translating the effort required into specific time frame. The following steps make up this translation. First one is identifying external and internal dependencies among the activities. Right? While you are testing, you need to see what are the dependencies, internal as well as external. External means from the external environment or external platform. Internal means internal environment or interfunctional dependency. Like if you want to test a database, you need to enter it first, right? So first you need to test the data by entering the data, and then you will see the database uh, after entering that data, right? So it is interdependent. Then you need to properly sequence the activities based on expected duration as well as on dependencies, right? Then identify the time required for each of the WBS activities, taking into account the above two factors. Then monitoring the progress. Continuously you need to monitor what is the progress. Then rebalancing schedule and resources as necessary. Sometimes you lag behind the schedule, sometimes you go beyond the schedule, so you need to balance those schedules and resources. So external dependencies of an activity are beyond the control and purview of manager person performing the activity. Some of the common external dependencies are availability of the product of the developer, hiring, you don't have enough person, then you don't have enough training, then some hardware or software has not been equipped, you have not acquired particular hardware or software for training, and availability of translated message files or text. And second is internal dependencies contain completing the test specification, have not completed test specification, then coding, scripting the test, then executing the test. These are the internal dependencies. Communication management. It's a vast topic, communication management. Communication management consists of involving and following procedures for communication that ensures that everyone is kept in synchronization with the right level of details. Right? So, as I said, communication is a very vast topic. Uh, it depends, it includes how you schedule the meetings, Right from how you schedule the meetings, how you generate the report, how you submit the report, how the reports are validated, how the configurations are validated, all those things comes under communication management. It's a vast topic. Right? So the basic motto of communication management is everybody should know, uh, or everybody should be aware of what he needs to be aware. Right? He should not be ignorant of something which he need to know. Right? So that is what the communication management. Then there is risk management. Risk management entails identifying the possible risk, quantifying the risk, then planning how to mitigate the risk, and responding to risk when they become a reality. This is very important question. This is a risk cycle, right? So first you will identify the risk, then you will quantify the risk. Quantify means you will classify the risk, in which category it falls, whether, or you can prioritize the risk, right? Then you need to mitigate the risk, means risk, you need to reduce the impact of the risk or the risk itself. Then you need to respond for the risk, and then if it is solved or not solved, you need to, and in the defect repository you will store the information. Okay? So risk identification, the following are some of the common ways to identify risk in the list. Use of checklists, you will check one by one functionality and find out the risk. Use of organizational history and metrics, you will identify where the last risk occurred, in which type of functionality the last risk occurred, and you will check for that. Then informal network across the industry, you may ask to your some friend who is outside of the industry or who is in the domain of a particular software, and you can ask him who works in a domain. Domain means, for example, banking. Banking is a domain, but as a software engineer, we don't study the banking system. We study only the programming system, right? So, a person who is in the domain can uh, very easily and effectively uh, explain you where you can identify the risk in a banking domain, right? So that's what informal networking across the industry. Then risk quantification deal with expressing the risk in numerical terms. Some numeric values you need to give so that you can identify the impact of the risk, right? There are two components to the quantification of risk. One is the probability of risk happening. Probability, I have already told you probability. The other is the impact of the risk. What will be the impact of it? The quantify both these into one number, risk exposure. When you multiply your probability with the impact, you will get a risk exposure, right? This will identify, or this will by using this risk exposure, you can classify whether the risk is simple, or risk has major impact, or risk is extreme. Then risk mitigation is there. Risk mitigation planning deals with identifying alternative strategy to combat a risk event should the risk materialize. If the risk occurs, to minimize the impact of the risk, what you can do. For example, a couple of mitigation strategies for the risk of attrition are to spread the knowledge to the multiple people and to introduce organization-wide process and standard. You can standardize some standard. You can have multiple copies for a particular thing. To be better prepared to handle the effect of a risk, it is advisable to have multiple mitigation strategies. You must have multiple mitigation strategies. Common risks are unclear requirements, then schedule dependencies, next is insufficient time for testing, showstopper defects, availability of skilled and motivated people for testing, inability to get a test automation tool, and so on. These are some of the common risks. Mm, Here are some typical risks, symptoms, and impact and mitigation plan. For example, development delay. So if you are having uh, development delay, so what will be the symptoms? Code drops from the development going through constant slippage. Right? So the code will not be available for testing. Right? So impact, less time becomes available for testing. So since code has not arrived fast, you cannot test it. And second impact is pushes product release date forward. The product release, you cannot release the product. So to mitigate, what can be there? Constant involvement of the testing team in the development plan. So you can have a testing team to get involved with the development team, and periodically they will tell them, okay, that we need to test this functionality, so you need to develop it fast. Right? Second is periodic and timely communication. Then strategy, staggering the testing activity by following the model 5 model, modified 5 model. It has been discussed in chapter 2. We will see later on what is this model. Another type of risk, that showstopper defect. The test cycle gets suspended, resume often. Yeah? So you are resuming and again it gets suspended testing. Right? Some showstopper defect is there. What is the impact? Wasted ideal testing resources. Right? The testing is stopped, so you are wasting your resources. Pressure on testing team when testing resume after a defect occurs. Possible pushing of the schedule forward. You can schedule may get shifted forward. So what can be mitigation plan? Have clear exit criteria for development before a product can be accepted for testing. So unnecessary same uh, testing the same defect, you must have a exit criteria for developer so that they cannot uh, deliver it to the testing team. Making the testing team perform other functions during the waiting time. This can be one of the solutions. Right? Like this, there may be many risks, and for that symptoms are there and impact is there, and then mitigation policies which we can. So we will stop here today.